One of the best stories about the power of the network and intangibles actually came out of some work that we were doing with one of our aerospace customers. And they had this very large, convoluted, long process to develop contracts for defense industry, government contracts and that kind of thing. They created a very nice application to support all the documentation. And the total amount of time it would take to fill out the forms and push the buttons on the application was maybe a total of 2 weeks, which even that was probably a bit of an exaggeration. And yet, once this process started, it would take 5 to 6 months to complete one of these proposals. So we did a value network analysis of this proposal writing process. And what we found was actually very interesting. So if we look at all of the activity involved in creating the proposal as one value creating network, what we found were there were particular phases, or what we call a state change or phase change for the network. So the first phase, of course, would be developing the draft statement of work. The next phase would be formalizing that statement of work. Then it would go to the people who write the proposal, the draft proposal, final proposal, pricing, and so forth. And each of these we looked at as a different way that that network activates. And what we found is that at every phase change, people would complete the documents, push the button, and it would go to the next phase, is something would not carry over. So back in the little statement of work, people would say, oh, we're not going to need fasteners in this proposal. They have some on hand, along with hundreds of other little details. They get to the next phase, someone's looking at this statement of work, and they wonder, why are there no fasteners? Is this a mistake? And they would have to try to recreate the story. So they would at some point, convene a conversation, figure out what's going on, and finish their piece of work, upload it into the application, goes on to the next person. So the proposal writer goes, well, why are there no fasteners? And they would have to recreate the story. Same thing would happen with pricing. And so when we actually mapped this out for how it really happens, we found that there was a role that people were playing, and it was a very ad hoc role. They called it communication convener. And what it was is people would get so frustrated that they would call a meeting, or they would begin to set up a conference call to have a conversation about what the heck is going on here. All of those conversations are what we call the intangible human interactions that support the process. What was taking 5 or 6 months was not pushing the button on the application or writing the documents. What was taking the time was figuring out the story. So by modeling this as a value network, what people were able to identify is, first of all, a role that needed to be played deliberately instead of ad hoc, so that there would be periodic convenings of the conversation. But they were also much more conscious about these handoffs from one phase to another, and actually developed a set of criteria so that you didn't push the button to hand it off until all of this criteria had been met. And what became even more insightful was that the best handoffs were when 1 or 2 of the roles would carry over from one phase to the next. So we learned an awful lot from doing that, but it also really drove home the power of looking at the network patterns around the process, the human interactions that need to support the process, and giving those just as much careful attention as the formal transactions.